extraordinary row with Suella Braverman was thrown out of Tory party conference. Find out why shortly. And in My Take at 10, the BBC star in trouble for stating biological facts. The corporation is cancelling women and you're paying for the pleasure. I'll be dealing with our increasingly woke national state broadcaster in no uncertain terms at 10 o'clock. Two hours of big opinion, big debate and big entertainment. So much to get through, but first the news headlines and Aaron Armstrong.
Thanks, Mark. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. The Chancellor has indicated Wednesday's budget is unlikely to include tax cuts. Jeremy Hunt says his spending plan will be prudent and responsible. The Chancellor says the economic headroom set out by financial forecasts has gone against the government. Recently, with the Office for Budget Responsibility calculating he's got £2 billion less to spend than previously thought. Speaking to GB News earlier, Jeremy Hunt said his budget will deliver better value for taxpayers.
It is wrong to say that we should be putting more money into the public sector.
So you want fewer civil servants to be more productive?
Correct.
You want fewer people to do more?
I think we've got to stop always looking at the inputs and always saying that the way to get better public services is to spend more and actually ask if we could be more efficient.
A 7-year-old girl has died after a migrant boat carrying 16 people capsized in northern France. She'd been travelling with her pregnant mother, her father and 3 siblings. The boat got into difficulty off the coast of Dunkirk in an attempt to cross the English Channel in the early hours of this morning. Rail fares in England and Wales have risen by almost 5%, an increase above the rate of inflation. That's despite some of the highest numbers of train cancellations for a decade, amid strikes, bad weather and faulty infrastructure. Public transport campaigners say passengers are being punished by the increases, which could add hundreds of pounds to annual travel costs for some commuters.
I would be quite happy for the rail fares to go up if they invested the profits in the infrastructure so that the rail network and the rolling carriage was consistently good standard and that the trains ran on time.
It's a bit much. That's just sort of like come out the blue. That took me off key there.
Nothing's really changed on the trains, so it's not really fair to raise the prices. I think if there's a change and more trains are put on and stuff like that, maybe then, but not right now.
2 women have been charged after pouring porridge and jam on a bust of Queen Victoria at a Scottish art museum. Saoirse Nevarton and Hannah Taylor also spray-painted an expletive on the plinth at the Kelvin Grove Gallery and Museum in Glasgow. The pair from the campaign group This Is Rigged reportedly glued themselves to the bust afterwards. The group says it carried out the vandalism to protest against increasing food insecurity. And Donald Trump could take another step towards a November election rematch with Joe Biden later. Voting's underway in Washington, D.C., with Mr. Trump hoping to continue his clean sweep of states in the race to become the Republican Party's presidential candidate. He's now won 6 states after victories in Missouri, Michigan and Idaho last night. Mr. Trump, though, made a number of false claims at campaign events, including allegations Joe Biden is smuggling people across the border, and he again confused the current president with Barack Obama. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. That's it. Now back to Mark.
My thanks to Aaron Armstrong. Welcome to a busy Mark Dolan tonight. In My Big Opinion, the Prime Minister has made a bold speech calling out the threat of extremism to our democracy. Sir Keir Starmer will likely be our next Prime Minister. Would he make such a strong speech? I wouldn't hold my breath. In the big story, should Rishi Sunak capitalise on a possible budget bounce and call a snap election in May? I'll be joined live in the studio by one of Britain's most respected journalists, Tom Bower. With illegal immigration rife across America, the UK and Europe, why has the West given up on border control? I'll be talking to a renowned global commentator who says the free world has lost the plot. My Mark Meets guest is the politician who, after an extraordinary row with Suella Braverman, was thrown out of the Tory party conference. Find out why shortly. And in My Take at 10, the BBC star in trouble for stating biological facts. The corporation are cancelling women and you're paying for the pleasure. I'll be dealing with our increasingly woke national state broadcaster in no uncertain terms at 10 o'clock. Also, should the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt splash the cash in next week's budget? I'll be asking tonight's Newsmaker, former Government Minister Anne Widdecombe. And tomorrow's Front Pages at 10:30, with three top pundits tonight who haven't been told what to say and who don't follow the script. Tonight, Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Lord Coolvere Ranger and Nigel Nelson. Plus, the most important part of the show, your emails. They come straight to my laptop, mark@gbnews.com. And this show has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. So, a big 2 hours to come. I'll be dealing with the BBC at 10, but first, my big opinion. For those extolling the positives of a multicultural society with no willingness to acknowledge both its benefits and also its now very clear downsides, have fallen strangely silent. Because it's politicians with an almost religious attachment to the idea that diversity is our strength who have been impacted by Britain's troubled experiment. Now, it's my view that the UK is a global beacon of diversity, a tolerant, free and fair country welcoming to all. Name me a more successful integrated society on the planet. It wasn't even a story when Rishi Sunak became our first British Asian Premier. And fair play to him for never playing the race card or making political capital from it. Rishi Sunak understands the trivial, puerile and divisive nature of identity politics. But politicians on the left like Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner and Wes Streeting, who love a bit of identity politics, have all been aggressively harassed in the street over their party's position on Israel. Other Labour backbenchers have seen their constituency offices ambushed, have spoken of feeling unsafe at home and in need of round-the-clock bodyguards. Alongside the millions of peace-loving British Muslims in this country who make such a contribution to our society, there is a vocal but powerful and mobilised minority who have run amok on the streets of Britain, hijacking the so-called peace marches with anti-Semitic hate speech, with some of these messages most egregiously projected onto our great national monument of Big Ben. The chaotic Rochdale by-election was a religious and ideological cage fight, not befitting a mature Western democracy. Its winner, George Galloway, buoyed by the Muslim vote, wants to eliminate Israel. Charming. One candidate, Simon Danchuk, claims that he was subjected to death threats, so much so that he had to take his wife out of the campaign for her own safety. And a vote in the House of Commons, the very seat of our representative democracy, cancelled for fears reportedly expressed by Keir Starmer that if Labour MPs voted a certain way, they could suffer violence when leaving the chamber. Too many progressives have denied that there is a problem of parallel societies for years. But fermented in isolated communities, religious, cultural and political extremism is like a hurricane. Yes, it's not a problem until it reaches your house. Decent Labour MPs are now sadly feeling the heat and are being threatened by the mob. Will our likely next Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, perhaps keen not to offend British Muslim voters, be as strong as Sunak was on Friday about extremism? Will Sir Keir Starmer, as the Prime Minister wants to, tackle scandals like the Batley schoolteacher still on the run with his family after showing students an image of the Prophet Muhammad as an educational tool? Will Starmer tackle the scourge of anti-Jewish hate being spewed in some of Britain's mosques and on those weekly marches? It doesn't bode well, does it, when Sir Keir Starmer himself accidentally and mysteriously, totally by accident, I promise, forgot to wear a poppy when making a video for British Muslims in the run-up to Remembrance Weekend. Worth pointing out, he'd been wearing a poppy earlier that day. The vast majority of British Muslims are peace-loving, but it's time to stand up to the dangerous scourge of Islamic extremism, which is an assault on our values, our history, our way of life and our democracy. Will an incoming Labour government do the same? Can we trust Keir Starmer to stand up to this tyranny? I won't hold my breath. Your reaction, mark at gbnews.com. I'll get to your emails shortly. But first, let's hear from tonight's top pundits. My goodness, we're coming in strong tonight. Former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, former advisor to Boris Johnson, the one and only Lord Coolvere-Ranger, Lord Ranger, and GB News' very own senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Brilliant stuff. Well, look, great to have all of you with me. If I could start with you, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, do you think that Keir Starmer is the man to stand up to extremism in this country?
I think he's already shown he's not, that he has done everything to appease both sides as much as he possibly can. And what we actually need is strength and morality at the moment, and he isn't demonstrating leadership at all.
Were you impressed by Sunak's emergency statement on Friday? It
needed to be said, but action should have been taken earlier, and actions are far louder than words. I don't think there was much in that speech that anyone with any modicum of humanity could disagree with. That we can't be controlled by extremists of any form is clearly a truth, and we have to fight back against it. But actions speak louder than words. We have got to see these extremists defeated.
And how might that manifest itself? If you're calling for an intifada on Whitehall, perhaps you're arrested.
Indeed. The police have got to enforce the law for the safety of all the rest of us.
However, Lord Coolvere-Ranger, supporters of Labour could argue that it's the Conservatives that have presided over this growth in extremism over the last 14 years.
No, I think that's a difficult thing to really criticise the government or the Conservative Party for. I think we've seen a number of different things change in across society. We've seen the challenge in broadcasting. We've seen the challenge across the media. Exactly. We've seen the emergence of platforms like this that have been responding and reacting. And I think politics has had to evolve over this period. I don't think this is a blame culture, but it's then how do the politicians react? What kind of leadership do they show? That was leadership being shown by the Prime Minister on Friday. Yes, he could have said it earlier, was highlighting, but he has said it. He is facing this down. There are other voices in the Conservative Party that have been saying these things as well, but we don't see that across politics. And this could be some more dividing lines between the parties for the public to choose who's providing the leadership.
Talk is cheap, though, as you know. You're a man of substance. You've liked to deliver when, you know, certainly in City Hall and now in the House of Lords. Wasn't what Mr Sunak had to say just a talking shop?
No, I think that's a clear signal of where the Prime Minister of this country is, where the government is, and I think that's an indicator. Firstly, there's a lot of people out there who are feeling they can't say those things, and he gave a voice to millions of people in this country about how they were feeling, about what they're seeing happening in this country. That's very important. Secondly, he's giving a strong signal, as the Home Secretary is, to the police about how they need to respond and react to these things.
Nigel Nelson, Keir Starmer, mindful of the Muslim vote, is unlikely to stand up to extremism when he becomes Prime Minister. Would you agree?
No, I don't think that's true at all. I mean, he supported what the Prime Minister said. It was one of the weirdest speeches I've ever seen. I mean, obviously, you all quite like it, but...
I've got to say, it would seem to have been written in more of a hurry than one of my monologues.
Well, you did a better monologue there than he did. But the idea of actually doing an urgent speech on a rainy Friday tea time...
When a lot of people were in the pub.
When a lot of you were in the pub, suddenly we all panic and think he's calling a general election.
Yeah.
Why do that? There were there were very few announcements in it, and what they were very minor. If Keir Starmer had been doing that, he'd have waited until Monday and made a statement to the House of Commons, which is where it should have been made. OK,
but notwithstanding the timing...
Can I add that he was responding, the Prime Minister's responding to a major by-election that's happened that week.
That's bizarre as well. He spoke by somebody who is not hugely important.
No, I think we have to look at the context of what's happened in Rochdale, where the media are focusing on that. You'd have a weekend of conversation around this issue. You have George Galloway entering Parliament on Monday. The Prime Minister wanted to make his point before all of that happens, and the sort of following circus starts.
There's something really...
And I think he's actually making the political weather.
It's weird to bang on about democracy when the man who spooked him got 12,000 votes. Rishi Sunak wasn't voted in by anybody. He didn't get a single vote to become Prime Minister.
It was, unfortunately, for the sake of of all of us, something that needed saying. And surely it is actually better to say it quite quickly, to get the message out there, to be clear about where we stand, rather than say, when there was an issue of an anti-Semitic candidate in Rochdale, Keir Starmer taking days to decide and shilly-shallying backwards and forwards, giving a very mixed message. I'm glad that Rishi did do it quickly.
Yeah, it was a difficult one to actually deal with that one, and I think he was too late doing it. But what that speech on Friday did was to give George Galloway a status he doesn't warrant. This is not some huge kind of sea change in British politics. It was a freak by-election, a weird result. We don't know what would have happened if a proper Labour candidate had been standing.
Well, and I think there are very strong allegations of intimidation and violence within the campaign that will have spooked all political parties, that you cannot run a democracy when the candidates or their supporters are living in fear.
Indeed. I mean, what happened in Rochdale, that campaign looks to have been an affront to our democratic process. Death threats, intimidation, I think more to come on that. So I think the Prime Minister was right to speak out. But what do you think? And would Keir Starmer speak as strongly if he were Prime Minister? Let me know your thoughts, Mark, at gbnews.com. But next in the big story, should Rishi Sunak capitalise on a possible budget bounce and call a snap election in May? That's just a couple of months from now. I'll be joined live in the studio by one of Britain's most respected journalists, Tom Bower. Don't go anywhere.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
So after his mad dash to see his father last week, Prince Harry predictably went on TV to talk about it. He gave his first interview to Good Morning America, whilst apparently being filmed by a crew that were doing a documentary on the Invictus Games. He didn't disclose his father's diagnosis, but frankly, even the fact that he was on TV talking about it was concerning. No wonder they're keeping him at arm's length. This is what he said.
How did you get the news that the King was ill?
I spoke to him.
And what did you do next?
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family.
Absolutely.
Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together.
He also said that he loves his family, but then he said that he had his own family in America. So which family does he love? The late Queen's last few years of life were marred with accusations of racism, which Harry later backtracked on, claiming that they hadn't actually used the word, so inadvertently admitting to gaslighting us all. But the Sussex's stock is falling in the States, and the only thing that makes them interesting is their proximity to the royal family. And now the King is ill, Harry has even offered to muck in and take on official duties to help his father. Look, I want to see reconciliation and love and joy, but I'm afraid Meghan has yet to even speak to her father as far as we know, and Harry didn't apparently even reach out to his brother. Whilst his dad might fall for it, I doubt William will be as soft. Good luck with that, Harry.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Would Keir Starmer step up to extremism when and if he becomes Prime Minister. Well, the emails are coming in thick and fast. Nadia says, Mark, most voters do not do any research into Keir Starmer or watch GB News to learn about the many reasons he should not be our next PM. Unfortunately, people will just vote on the basic principles that they believe the Labour Party will give them, unaware of what he believes on other important issues, i.e. gender, the poppy, just two examples that you referred to. How about this from Derek, who says, Mark, Sunak just uttered weak, woke weasel words, which will be completely ignored by the people they were aimed at. Cheap double standards after sacking Suella and Lee. We'll keep those emails coming. Mark at gbnews.com. Don't forget, I'll be dealing with the ever-woke BBC at 10 o'clock. This time, a presenter in trouble for stating biological fact. Don't miss it. But now, the big story. And tonight, there's growing speculation that Rishi Sunak may capitalise on a post-budget political bounce and call a snap election in May. On Wednesday, the Chancellor is expected to reveal that the economic outlook for the country is positive, with the worst effects of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine now behind us. Plus, there is speculation that Jeremy Hunt will reduce taxes on hard-working Brits in order to boost the economy and put money back into people's wallets. So, could Britain be a week or two away from an announcement of a general election? Let's get the views of one of the most respected journalists in the country and political biographer, Tom Bauer. Tom, great to see you in the studio. First of all, a dilemma for Rishi Sunak. If he waits till November, he looks like he's hanging on for dear life. But if he goes in May, the economy hasn't had a chance to pick up. What would you do?
Well, I think it's all got to do with the Rwanda flights. I think that the rush now to get the legislation through, probably by Easter, one flight off to Rwanda and then the election will be called. I think that must be his tactic, not announced, but undoubtedly that is a dividing line with Labour and would make it much easier for the Tories to fight on immigration.
So you think, therefore, if he can get that first Rwanda flight in the air by Easter, that's a May poll would be his preferred?
Well, it'll be early April. I mean, the legislation, I believe, will get through by Easter, and then the first plane will fly off in early April, and then he'll call the election. That's the way he should do it, because there'll be a clear dividing line with Labour.
Wednesday is a big day. It's a big day for my viewers and listeners. It's the budget. It's a big day politically. Is Jeremy Hunt the right man for the job?
Sadly not. I think Jeremy Hunt has totally failed as a politician, and he failed completely as a Tory Chancellor. He gives absolutely no hope whatsoever. I don't even believe he's a proper capitalist Conservative. I mean, even to allow speculation that the Tories may cancel non-dom status is such an un-Tory thing to suggest, because the non-doms won't stay in Britain to pay the taxes. They'll just go off to Portugal or Italy or any of these countries to avoid it, where it's all enshrined. And that is not... And the amount of money that can be raised is pitifully small, and it sends out all the wrong signals that London and Britain is open to the world as an entrepreneurial Singapore-on-Thames. So I'm really disappointed, but not surprised, because I've never had any confidence in Jeremy Hunt. He would have lost the 2019 election, which Boris so gloriously won, because he's not a convincing Tory.
I can't say I'm his biggest fan. During the pandemic, I thought he showed his true colours and his values by praising China's approach to the pandemic.
Well, not only that, you're absolutely right. But what has he since done? No budget has actually captured imaginations. He is now believing the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, which gets every forecast wrong. So he's enslaved himself to this group of failures, and I just don't understand.
He could argue that he steadied the ship. The cost of government borrowing has gone down, inflation has halved, and we've had a slight recession, but largely remained in positive growth.
He can, but actually the cost of the borrowing has gone up, but that's not his fault. Well, interest rates have gone up, and actually Rishi Sunak should have borrowed money at 0.5% when he had the chance during COVID, so that was Sunak's fault. But he doesn't inspire confidence that he's an entrepreneurial Chancellor, and that is the condemnation of him. I mean, he doesn't all the time show up the fallacy of Labour's policy, that they have no plan, they have no actual project for improving the creation of wealth in this country, because not one member of the Labour shadow cabinet has ever earned a penny as a businessman in his or her life. They don't know what profit means, and only with profit do you create wealth. But Jeremy Hunt never shows that up. He's so bland, he's so boring. He's the worst sort of electioneering chancellor the Tories could have at this stage.
It does seem like the political class, whether it's this current Conservative Party, which many think isn't really Conservative at all, and Labour, have forgotten that the way you tackle inequality and deliver social justice is through economic growth, is through national income. What about Labour, then? You wrote a cracking book about Jeremy Corbyn. The book is called Dangerous Hero, Corbyn's Ruthless Plot for Power. Sir Keir Starmer is pretty ruthless too. What kind of Prime Minister do you think he'll make?
I don't think he's ruthless at all. I think he's a third-rate lawyer who just mouths an opinion and then quickly reverses himself and somersaults and looks for another idea.
He's chucked people out of the party, including Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, not much.
He's held the line on Israel?
Well, has he? I thought that was the whole point of the great debacle in the Commons the other day, that he had to urge the Speaker to break with convention to protect him from a revolt by his own members. I mean, that's the whole problem. He hasn't held the line. The line should have been that there can't be a ceasefire till Hamas puts down its guns. But instead, he's just fallen in because he's terrified of a revolt. And the whole George Galloway thing has shown how the party actually is riven still with anti-Semitism.
Indeed, that is definitely a concern, and they had, of course, their candidate in Rochdale, who they had to disown because of his conspiracy theory about the idea that October the 7th was actually created by Israel.
But, Mark, imagine that tape recording hadn't come out.
That person would be a sitting Labour MP now.
Exactly, and all the people in that room who endorsed what Mr. Ali said never whispered a word. And that is the frightening aspect. I'm sure throughout the whole of the Labour Party there are dozens of Alis, all of whom have got away with it so far because they haven't been secretly recorded.
Well, listen, Tom, let's bring my top pundits in, if I can. Annunziata Rees-Mogg, Lord Ranger and Nigel Nelson. And let me ask you, Lord Coolvere Ranger, perhaps just in the natural political cycle, that notwithstanding Tom's concerns about a possible Labour government and Keir Starmer, that Britain needs a change. It's time for a change of government.
Well, we need to have a view that says how we're going to deal with the economic situation. And I think, Tom's highlighting some clear Tory views about what Conservative voters are looking for. Dare I say it, growth, lower taxes, investment in the economy, and getting a control of what's happening in terms of the public services and delivery. These are key messages that I think Conservative Party voters are looking for, and maybe they haven't had that clearly coming through. What everyone's hoping is that Wednesday there'll be not just one rabbit, but several rabbits that will be pulled out of the hat. But even as we run up to Wednesday, we're hearing the briefings happening that pot that the Chancellor has is getting ever smaller and smaller. So, expectations are obviously being managed. But I think what the Conservative Party is looking for is something it can stand on as a platform for the next general election, be that sooner or later in this year.
OK, well, Annunziata, the Tories have had 14 years. It's time for a change.
It's certainly time for a change in direction. That up until 2020, we had to abide by the growth and stability targets of the European Union, and that is no longer the case. They have been rewritten into British law, but it is up to our Chancellor as to whether he adheres to exactly what the OBR forecasts, which is notoriously hopeless and inaccurate, or not. And I think this is the exact moment we need bold action. We need a clear change in direction to free our economy and allow growth to start so we can come out of this cost of living crisis and this mire that we have got stuck in of sluggish growth, low productivity, and become a thriving country once more.
Nigel Nelson, Tom Bauer is one of the most astute political biographers in the country. He's just described Keir Starmer, potentially our next Prime Minister, as not ruthless, not strong, and a third-rate lawyer. Is he right?
Well, I don't think any of that is right. I think Keir Starmer has been extremely ruthless with his party. And we've talked about the wobble he had over the candidate in Rochdale, but for the most part, he has sort of ripped anti-Semitism out by its roots. So I don't see that. As far as the election date goes, I agree with Tom that you will need to get a Rwanda flight off the ground. One plane with one migrant on board would be enough to actually symbolically show that they've kept to that policy. And they have been laying the groundwork for a May the 2nd election with checking on polling stations that are not having local elections to see their availability. There could be only one reason for that. Bringing in the national insurance cut in January, rushing it through to give people 4 months in their pay packets. The only problem is that they're still, the Labour is still 26 points ahead of the polls. None of that seems to make any difference. So if it does come on May the 2nd, and the final date we'll know to call it will be March the 26th, if it does happen on May the 2nd, it looks like a Tory wipeout.
There you go. Well, look, that is my final question, Tom Bauer. Do you think the outcome of the next election is a done deal? Is Mrs Starmer right to be measuring up curtains for number 10?
Well, I think Mrs Starmer should just ponder what happened in 2017 when Theresa May went to the polls with a 20% lead and ended up 5 weeks later with a 0% lead and a hung parliament. And the other thing that Mrs Starmer should remember is that the 40% of the electorate, according to YouGov poll recently, is undecided. So there's a lot to play for. Yes, Labour is ahead now, but if only Sunak and the Tory party could get into real campaign mode, I think they've got a fighting chance to just retain a slight majority, if not a hung parliament.
A thrill to have Tom Bauer in the studio. I look forward to your speedy return. But next up, with illegal immigration rife across America, the UK and Europe, why has the West given up on border control? I'll be talking to a renowned global commentator who says the free world has lost the plot. That's next.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Yeah, so describe the contents of the letter for us, because it is quite strongly worded, isn't it? And it suggests that your property is empty. And what do they suggest it's going to be used for?
They say, as part of this process, Northamptonshire Council is identifying empty properties and sites within the area, with the aim of encouraging owners to bring premises back into use or to find alternative options for derelict sites. The resettlement team in Northamptonshire Council supports asylum seekers and refugees across 3 different projects: Homes for Ukraine, Afghan resettlement and asylum dispersal. At present, we are seeing a considerable increase in positive immigration decisions being made in favour of asylum seekers. So basically, they're wanting accommodation. But who goes around and assesses whether these properties are lived in or they are actually empty?
Clearly, Ted, no one had bothered to come and look at your house at all, had they?
What do you want now? Because clearly you are both very shaken by this letter, and that letter that you received in response has not gone far enough. Do you want an apology? What more do you want to see?
Well, she said here that she's, I sincerely apologise, this Lindsay Bellchambers, but I don't see, there was no explanation as to how they've come to say this property was empty, whether it was disused, whether it was unkempt, or what. If you go back through the history of the property, it's not been empty.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I've got to say, a perennial theme on the show is your disaffection with all of the main parties, which is why this email from Matthew sums up the thoughts of many. Matthew says, "Hi, Mark. If everyone votes for reform and they get a 50% majority, we can save our green and pleasant land from the ultimate decimation of Labour and what he calls the con-liberals." Well, thanks for that. Keep those emails coming. Don't forget, I'll be dealing with the ever-woke BBC at 10 o'clock, one of their biggest radio stars in trouble for stating biological reality. But next up, with the US, the UK and Western Europe experiencing unprecedented levels of illegal and legal net migration, why has the West dropped the ball on border control? Are high numbers coming into our countries good for the economy and an answer to our ageing populations? Are they morally the right thing to do as millions flee poverty, persecution and war? Or is the current scale of migration a national security concern and a threat to our values and the Western way of life? Well, to discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome international business guru and global political commentator Hilary Fordwich. Hi, Hilary.
Yeah, pleasure to be here with you, Mark.
Great to have you in the studio. Is this policy of mass migration in the West an accident or by design?
Well, actually, if you think about it, it can't be by accident, because if it's by accident, it would have been fixed by now, wouldn't it? Few things here. Number one, let's just make sure that we all acknowledge there's been a lot, obviously, in the UK that's been in terms of migration over the years and centuries. My gosh, Angles and Saxons and Vikings and...
Not to mention the Irish. I'm a Dolan.
Oh, Dolan, right. No, yes, and we have the best Indian food in the world here in London,
Correct.
right? But they all came with one thing in mind. They came loving this country, and they came to contribute to this country. And the same thing in the US. Immigration, obviously, unless you're an American Indian, you're an immigrant in the United States, even more so than the UK, really, in most recent history, right? That's the huge and vast difference that we must remember before we have this conversation, right? They came, they were legal, they did it the legal way, went through the process, and they assimilated. So I call it the A word. It's about assimilation. They wanted to assimilate to make both countries great. So we have the similar issue here. Now, in terms of numbers, if we can just like sort of do a level set here. In the UK, it's total nearly 1 million, something like that, with a population in England, at least, of about, say, 56 million. So in the United States, now illegals are actually near 10 million. That's almost the size of the state of New Jersey, right? So it's more, though, here, percentage-wise, with the population, because it's like 330 million in the US. Now to your question. Right. Is this an accident? It actually can't be, Mark. And you know how, Mark? Because it's on the books in the United States. Biden does not need Congress to stop this. It's actually on the books since 1996. He could, by executive order, stop this. Now, the state of Texas, they have actually got called the Lone Star program. They have decided to defend themselves, putting up barbed wire and stopping this because they can. So it must be deliberate, or else Biden could stop it tomorrow with an executive order.
A political decision.
Has to be.
Am I right in thinking that the figure for illegal immigration into America last year, in 1 year alone, was over 3 million people?
Yes.
And that's 1% of the population.
Absolutely. And again, it's now the size of the state of New Jersey, pretty much. Overall,
Indeed. And of course, even the left in America are now complaining about this. New York, which is a Democrat state, has been saying, we're overflowing, we can't take any more migrants.
Well, because there's a pressure on the local community. Actually, what happened in Chicago over Thanksgiving, the holiday that everybody knows, you get the turkey dinner in America.
Yeah.
So in Chicago, ready? 8,000 illegal immigrants were given 6 months free housing, and Mark, they were given a free Thanksgiving meal. The local community, the poor community in Chicago, majority of whom happen to be black people.
Tax-paying Americans.
Tax-paying, well, and poor people there as well. So you're either a taxpayer in case you resent the money, or the poor community happened to be majority black community, went and wanted just a free Thanksgiving lunch, turned away. And now you're having people in in Chicago that were lifelong Democrats saying our party has deserted us and now they're going to vote Republican. That's what's happening. There's like a change here because they're seeing what is happening to their communities.
Now, the issue with this mass migration is that the political elite have inflicted it upon Western societies without any debate, without a mandate.
Without a vote. Without a vote.
The public haven't been asked about what numbers will be acceptable.
Yes. And actually, I'll go back to Winston Churchill. Remember what Churchill said? He said, democracy, he said, it's not necessarily a great form of government, but it's better than all the other ones that have been tried.
Yes,
he said, like, the worst form of government. This is what could happen, and this is what sort of the Elon Musk just recently said. Remember, he said on X, he said that the Democrats are wanting to make this a one-party country. This is really, if you want to say about what's the underlying issue here, it's about what's going to happen to democracy, because eventually they could vote. They could vote in the UK for there to be Sharia law or whatever in the country, and that's what can happen in the United States.
And the assumption is that illegal migrants coming in are likely to vote Democrat.
That now, yes, absolutely, Mark, you're totally right.
Or perhaps Labour in this country.
Yes, except, you're right, that is what they're planning on, Yet, and this is what's interesting, those that have come legally, say, for example, from Cuba, majority of them, they actually end up voting Republican because they have family values and they experience socialism. So they end up actually, so it could, somewhat actually backfire.
Indeed, and also a lot of people that come into the country want to pull the ladder up. So I'm here now.
That's
don't want anyone else to come in.
Exactly, especially those of us that have immigrated legally.
But there is a flip side. What about the idea that migration is necessary for our ageing populations? You're looking at fruit pickers, care workers, nurses, that sort of thing. And the idea, the principle that economic growth is linked to levels of migration.
Well, that's totally fine. But then they should be legal. Go through the legal process. It's all about legal immigration versus illegal. Anybody that would do something illegally, is there a likelihood they might do something else illegal? That's the issue. They're not in the system also.
Why is legal net migration so high? Because Rishi Sunak is at pains to say he wants to stop the boats. But you could argue that's a bit of a red herring. That's tens of thousands in a year. But the legal net migration figure for the last calendar year was 700,000 people almost.
Yes, that's right. Yes, 6 to 8.
Again, why is this happening?
Well, if anybody had the exact answer, but I do think it has to do with what Elon Musk said. I do think it's to do with voting, and it's about wanting to change the population.
But why would a Conservative government allow this to happen?
Here in this country? Well, and the question is how Conservative...
Is this a globalist?
Yeah, global.
And what does that mean for the uninitiated? What would that mean, a globalist project?
It actually means, well, somebody once said recently, and I rather prefer to stick to facts and innuendo, but Bill Gates was at a global meeting with global leaders and was saying, well, but he's not a global leader. And then, but... So maybe it's money and the global corporations, and there's a global influence of wanting to have the global influence.
Now, I know you're no conspiracy theorist, but I mean, is there this idea of no borders? I mean, it was Emmanuel Macron, who I thought was politically very brave a few months ago, when he said on a French TV chat show, we cannot accept the misery of the world. But it seems that the political elite would differ on that one.
Yes, that's what it seems. Absolutely, that's what it's seeming.
That it's our job just to swallow up everybody from across the world.
Yes.
And swallow it.
Well, and undermine, and there's also that sort of movement to undermine what had been the establishment. So there's more control. There's more control.
Donald Trump, he's won a string of Republican presidential contests. He could get more good news later today. So he is a shoo-in, isn't he, for the nomination to represent the Republicans in November. Does he win in November if he achieves
currently right now, the only thing is he actually, there is no route for him to actually win unless he ends up winning over those that have voted for Nikki Haley. And the deciding factor always in the US is the independents. Obviously, the die-hard Republicans are always going to vote Republican, but it's these independents in the middle, and many of the independents, I think it's 83% of the independents actually voted for Nikki Haley. Those that lean independent, Republicans, voted for Nikki Haley. So he needs to win over those that voted for her. But yes, he had a sweep in Idaho, Missouri, and Michigan, and he's going into D.C. this Tuesday.
What's your appraisal of Trump? Because he's a very flawed individual, isn't he? I mean, he's not a figure of probity and integrity like you are. He's got a sort of checkered private life and strange attitude towards women, and it's endless court cases. Is he really fit for high office?
So, well, so yes, uncouth in many regards, unprofessional in many regards. However, I think it's more, if one could, the saddest thing is actually, I think that he actually shoots himself in the foot with some of the things that he says and he does, yes. I'll tell you a great hope that I had. Could I just say, I'm trying to stay out of my personal feelings, but when he came to visit the Queen, I covered that for the US networks, he came to visit the Queen, and Mark, he so admired her. And I kept thinking, if only, because that's somebody, I mean, he doesn't sort of admire and verbalise his admiration for many people.
He mainly only admires himself.
And I actually thought to myself, if only he could just have a tiny, minuscule fraction of her diplomacy and her regard for others and her mannerisms, everything, then perhaps it could have improved him. That's a great pity. However, it's his policies where we weren't at war and how well the economy did. That's what people are voting for.
Hilary Fordwich, what a thrill to have you in the studio. You're off back to the States soon.
Yes.
But please join us on Zoom for much more of this.
Absolutely, Mark.
This illumination. Brilliant stuff. What a fascinating conversation. Your reaction to what Hilary Fordwich has had to say, Mark, at gbnews.com. But next up, I'm looking forward to this, Mark Meets. Yes, indeed. It is the notorious Conservative politician who got into an extraordinary row with Suella Braverman. He was ultimately thrown out of Tory party conference. Find out why next.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
We're always told that there is a huge need for care workers in Britain. We're always told that the salaries just aren't big enough against the benefit system for British people to want to do that work. And there probably is some real truth in that. And yet, if up to 25% of those that come are acting illegally, and it would seem, up until now, that in some areas, foreign care workers come in, but bring in almost the same number of family members with them, that we need to have a proper debate about this. I'm very pleased to be joined by Mike Padgham, chair of the Independent Care Group. If I accept those arguments for a moment, how can it be that the system is so lax that up to 25% are found by the Inspector of Borders and Immigration to be working illegally?
Well, good evening to you, Nigel. It was good to join you. I mean, those figures are shocking to me. When I looked at it today, when I saw that 275 visas had been issued to a care home that didn't even exist, and a further over 1,000 people joined a company that only had previously 4 staff in it, it makes me wonder the bureaucracy of the Home Office didn't think to check that these companies exist in the first place, because it should be quite straightforward. If people are providing care, they're regulated by the Care Quality Commission. It's a simple phone call to check and double check. Sadly, there seems to have been very many loopholes at the beginning. I believe that's been tightened now, but I can't understand it, because all the providers that are doing it in the proper way have to go through quite a rigmarole to actually get approved, and it takes months. So it beggars belief that this has happened and people have been approved for a company that doesn't even exist.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight. It's time now for Mark Meets. And tonight, the Conservative politician and chair of the London Assembly, Andrew Boff, who made headlines at the last Tory party conference when being dragged out of the hall after heckling Suella Braverman. Take a listen.
Ideology is making our Conservative Party look transphobic and homophobic. This is not what the Conservative Party is about.
Lively stuff. Andrew Boff, welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Listen, you're welcome to heckle me.
No, it's all right. It's all right. Well, just it depends on what you say,
That's
really.
it. I can take a bit of pushback. What was it that Suella Braverman was saying that you objected to?
There was a load of things, the sort of vilification of asylum seekers, people who are just trying to make a good life for themselves. And then she went on, and they used this phrase, trans ideology, which is just a ridiculous phrase.
You don't like the expression because you think that it's masking transphobic thoughts about people, is that
Because
right?
it's about trans people. It's not about trans ideology. I did a report some while ago about what was going on in Poland about gay-free zones, for example. And there they used the terminology LGBT ideology. What they actually wanted to say is we don't like gay people. And the same is true. You stick ideology on the end of a group of people, and all of a sudden it becomes sinister and a threat to our way of life and all the rest of it. What she was actually talking about was trans people, as though they are some threat. And it's that I reject.
You must have been surprised that as a fully paid-up member of the Conservative Party, a Conservative supporter, that you were dragged out of the hall. I mean, you would expect this party to stand for free speech.
Yes, indeed. I mean, and it is all about free speech. It's all about people being able to exchange views. And that's always, you know, my first conference was 1975. Maggie Thatcher's
Was that her first conference?
Maggie Thatcher's first conference.
Were you there for her
as leader of the party.
first speech?
I was there, and if you look at the videos, I'm the young man sitting at the top of the balcony as she's delivering her first speech.
Was her first speech any good?
It was magnificent. But the interesting thing about it, where I was sitting in the conference hall, I could look kind of down on her because I was in the balcony, and what you couldn't see is her hands, and they were shaking like crazy. She had this amazingly confident persona, but she knew that speech to the Conservative Party conference was really important.
And she was still learning on the job, as she had 4 years in opposition, just getting into the role. And she did evolve and change in those years prior to power, didn't she?
She certainly did, and she was a very common-sense politician. She wasn't driven. She had a passion. She believed in freedom. She had an ideology. But what she didn't do is abandon everyone else in order to pursue it.
Now, I've got trans friends, and I think that if you're called Steve and you decide to be Stephanie, then full respect and good luck to you and all my love and support. However, the issue that some people have is the principle that when Steve becomes Stephanie, Stephanie now is a woman with all female rights. Is that a problem?
No, it's not a problem for me. Why would it be a problem for anyone?
Well, I wonder whether you have biological women who are unhappy to have somebody that has a male physiology in a female space.
What does biological women mean?
It's a adult human female.
What does that mean?
Well, we have two sexes, don't we? You have a man and a woman.
Well,
so I think, looking at you, you look very masculine to me.
There are, but you don't know, do you? I mean, I've met thousands.
Well, I can check if you want.
I'm 60. Well, I'm about to say I'm 65 years old. I've met tens of thousands of women in my life, and do you know what? I've never checked.
There you go. Well, listen.
Why should I?
Let me tell you, you're missing out.
Why should I?
Tell me about your amazing journey as well. Successfully in politics, but also privately. You were more or less the first person in Britain to have a same-sex civil partnership.
Yes.
How has the country changed since then for gay people?
It is a lot more. It became a lot more accepting of gay people. I'm a bit worried that we're now... the thing about human rights, the thing about rights that we have... is that people assume once you've got them, you'll never lose them. And I'm afraid that's not the case. And
it's like free speech, isn't it?
You have to constantly fight for those rights.
Yeah.
You know, I am the value of this country, the reason I'm a patriot is because we have taken the lead in the world in terms of the rights of the individual against a state that wants to take away our rights. And we have to constantly fight for those. Free speech, the right to lead your life in the way that you want to. We don't want state regulation of every aspect of our lives. And if you believe in that, then, you know, you should come and join me in the Conservative Party.
Was your altercation at conference and your treatment there by the security staff, did it tempt you to leave the party?
No, it's my party, it belongs to me.
And what about the election? Can Rishi Sunak win?
Well, I think he will win. You know, the problems with Rishi occasionally is he does speak a bit like a pamphlet, and it's a bit off-putting. But actually, the thing that showed me that he could win was actually when he did GBNews, when he did the hustings in GBNews. And all of a sudden, we saw the real Rishi, somebody who really is passionate. And it reminded me of that 92 general election when the Tories were heading for oblivion and Neil Kinnock was going to be Prime Minister. And what John Major did is he got on a soapbox and he just told it like it was, and we turned that election round. And that's what I can see in Rishi if we have more real Rishi rather than a pamphlet being read out.
Fascinating. Well, we didn't have a pamphlet, Andrew Boff, so thank you so much for coming in. Will you come back and see us again soon?
Whenever you like.
There you go. Fascinating conversation. My thanks to Andrew Boff. Next up, we've got tomorrow's front pages with full pundit reaction. And in my Take a 10, the BBC star in trouble for stating biological facts. The corporation are cancelling women and you're paying for the pleasure of it. All of that is next.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. It's quite a cold night tonight, some frost and dense fog patches once more. And then all eyes to the west as the next area of low pressure moves in, but it's going to take its time. Western areas seeing outbreaks of rain through Monday, northern and eastern areas holding on to dry weather until later. This evening, though, skies are clearing and temperatures are starting to fall away overnight. We'll see quite a widespread frost developing. Where winds are light, we'll see some mist and fog patches forming. Freezing fog patches as temperatures fall below freezing in the countryside. So there could be some tricky travelling conditions first thing, particularly across central southern parts of the UK. Further west, however, the winds start to increase, outbreaks of rain start to push in, and then this slowly moves north and eastwards through the day on Monday. Some heavier bursts in there possible, though parts of Scotland, northern and eastern parts of England will stay dry for much of the day. Plenty of sunny spells here, and the winds coming in from the south, temperatures lifting a little higher than the weekend, highs around 12 Celsius in the best of any brighter weather in the south. Then into Tuesday, weather systems start to clear away. We're left with a legacy of showers across some western areas, but there'll be plenty of sunny spells through the day. One or two of the showers could be on the heavy side. The next few days, it largely remains dry. There'll be some bright or sunny spells at times, temperatures above average.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Is a debate on gender really a far-right issue?
Far right. I'm so bored of that phrase, you know what I mean? Like, anyone who talks about... anyone who acknowledges that there are two sexes is suddenly far right, because that's what Hitler and Mussolini were all about. This question from Shirley is, of course, about Labour. They've been accused of being undemocratic because they pressured a pub into cancelling a debate, and this debate features Kelly J. Keane, who's been on this show a couple of times, and she's a campaigner, and she was just on the panel, and then they got a letter saying that they couldn't do it because Kelly J. Keane apparently attracts far-right groups. Now, they've tried this trick before, but because some awful, ghastly neo-Nazi types turned up near to an event that she was holding in Australia, they kind of tried to blame that on her and suggest that the two were the same thing. They weren't. That was an opportunistic group turning up to... they're not... neo-Nazis aren't pro-feminist. They're not pro an event called Let Women Speak. That's just ridiculous.
New Zealand's TV blurred her touching her zip because they said that her touching her zip was a far-right dog whistle because she's she's making that symbol.
Yeah, but she wasn't making the symbol, she was just adjusting a zip.
Yeah,
and
also, this isn't a far-right symbol.
I mean, that was incredible because she obviously wasn't making that symbol anyway. She was just adjusting a top. But this New Zealand news channel blurred out the hand so that they could pretend that it was some horrible ghastly... I mean, this is learning stuff, isn't it?
She's talked about having voted Labour in the past. She's so not far right.
But also,
I mean,
even if she were right-wing, which she isn't, why would they be banning a panel where there's a discussion about one of the most important issues of our day? What are Labour playing at here?
They're anti-democratic, aren't they? They're just kind of playing whack-a-mole with things they don't like. I think maybe I'll write to the pub and say I do want to see Kelly J. Keane there.
Yeah, but they won't listen to you
Well,
if you
no,
say
they
that,
won't.
will
They
they? Because
won't.
you've got the unfashionable opinion, Chris.
Well, and the unfashionable workplace.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
It's 10 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. In My Take at 10, the BBC star in trouble for stating biological facts. The corporation are cancelling women and you're paying for the pleasure of it. I'll be dealing with our increasingly woke national state broadcaster in no uncertain terms in just a couple of minutes.
They will get on Wednesday is a prudent and responsible plan.
Should the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt splash the cash in next week's budget? I'll be asking tonight's Newsmaker former government minister Anne Widdecombe. Plus tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from tonight's top pundits, including Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Coolvia Ranger and Nigel Nelson. So a packed show, lots to get through. I'll be dealing with the BBC in no uncertain terms. Why? Because you pay almost £160 a year for their services. Find out why they're on the naughty step straight after the headlines with someone that's never in trouble, Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong. The Chancellor has tried to play down expectations of tax cuts in Wednesday's budget. Jeremy Hunt's indicated his spending plan will be prudent and responsible. The Chancellor says the economic headroom set out by financial forecasts has gone against the government, with the Office for Budget Responsibility calculating he has £2 billion less to spend than previously thought. Speaking to GB News earlier, Jeremy Hunt said his budget will deliver better value for taxpayers.
It is wrong to say that we should be putting more money into the public sector.
So you want fewer civil servants to be more productive?
Correct.
You want fewer people to do more?
I think we've got to stop always looking at the inputs and always saying that the way to get better public services is to spend more and actually ask if we could be more efficient.
Talks to establish a new ceasefire deal in Gaza appear to have stalled amid reports Israel has boycotted the meeting. Negotiators have arrived in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, but it's understood Israeli diplomats are not in attendance after Hamas rejected their demand for a complete list of hostages who are still alive. Washington insists a deal for a 6-week pause to exchange hostages for Palestinian prisoners has all but been agreed by Israel and should be in place by the start of Ramadan on the 10th of March. A 7-year-old girl died after a migrant boat carrying 16 people capsized in northern France. She'd been travelling with her pregnant mother, her father and 3 siblings. The boat got into difficulty off the coast of Dunkirk in an attempt to cross the English Channel in the early hours of this morning. Rail fares in England and Wales have risen by almost 5% today, an increase above the rate of inflation. That's despite some of the highest number of train cancellations for a decade, amid strikes, bad weather and faulty infrastructure. Public transport campaigners say passengers are being punished by the increases, which could add hundreds of pounds to annual travel costs for some commuters.
I would be quite happy for the rail fares to go up if they invested the profits in the infrastructure so that the rail network and the rolling carriage was consistently good standard and that the trains ran on time.
It's a bit much. That's just sort of like come out the blue. That took me off key there.
Nothing's really changed on the trains, so it's not really fair to raise the prices. I think if there's a change and more trains are put on and stuff like that, maybe then, but not right now.
And Donald Trump could take another step towards a November election rematch with Joe Biden later. Voting's underway in Washington, D.C., with Mr Trump hoping to continue his clean sweep of states in the race to become the Republican Party's presidential candidate. He's now won 6 states after victories in Missouri, Michigan and Idaho last night. However, he made a number of false claims at campaign events, including allegations that Joe Biden's smuggling people across the border, and he again confused the current president with Barack Obama. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Mark.
My thanks to Aaron Armstrong, who returns in an hour's time. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Should the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt splash the cash in next week's budget? I'll be asking tonight's Newsmaker, former Government Minister Anne Widdecombe. Plus tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from my top pundits this evening. Former Brexit Party MEP, the fearless Annunziata Rees-Mogg, Conservative peer in the House of Lords Kulveer Ranger, and GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Plus, they'll be nominating their headline heroes and back page zeros. A packed hour, and those papers are coming. But first, my take at 10. It's time for the news. And the highly talented BBC Radio 4 presenter Justin Webb is in trouble with the corporation for stating a biological fact. Webb has been found guilty of breaking impartiality rules at our national broadcaster by calling trans women males on air. What's next? Being punished for pointing out gravity or that the Earth is round? Our post-truth national broadcaster upheld a complaint against the Today presenter after he said trans women, in other words, males, during a show last August. A listener complained that the comment amounted to Mr Webb giving his personal view on a controversial matter. The BBC's editorial complaints unit agreed. Well, of course they did, saying that Webb gave the impression of endorsing one viewpoint in a highly controversial area. Well, it's not controversial if you've got half a brain or if you did GCSE biology. A presenter called someone with a penis male, and now he's in trouble with bosses. Is it any wonder why people are turning away from the BBC? If a news broadcaster whose job it is to impart the events of the day and gather facts cannot say things which are scientifically and biologically the case, we are in trouble. Not being able to call somebody with an XY chromosome a fully intact person with a phallus and testicles male shows how far down the rabbit hole we have descended. Impartiality doesn't come into it. It's not an opinion. If you have a Willy Winkle, a John Thomas, a Ding Dong, a friendly pencil, a schlong, a wobbly wand, a love sword, you are a male. And it's certainly not transphobic to say so. If it was, every dictionary ever printed and every biology book ever published is guilty of the same crime. People who adhere to the facts about biological sex are often called gender critical. Well, they're not gender critical, they're gender factual. Writing in The Spectator magazine, Debbie Hayton, who is a trans woman herself, has said the radio star Justin Webb has been wrongly treated by the BBC. Hayton wrote this. She said the BBC has upheld a ludicrous complaint against the Today programme's Justin Webb. Back in August, Webb told listeners that trans women were, in other words, males. Well, this basic truth should not be controversial. Debbie Hayton goes on, we trans women are male. It is a necessary criterion. Women cannot be trans women because women are female. I wonder how long it takes for the brilliant Debbie Hayton to also get cancelled. Now, of course, we all have free speech and you can say whatever you like within the law. But to punish somebody for saying things which are true and are the case is the point of no return. And it's truly shocking that the BBC are enforcing what is an anti-scientific ideology, which says that even if you are a fully intact male As long as you feel like a woman, you are a woman, and therefore presumably would be accommodated in a female prison, entitled to be in a rape crisis centre, a female hospital ward. You can compete against women in female sport or use female bathrooms and changing rooms whilst letting it all hang out. With its enforcement of this dystopian madness, the BBC is cancelling women. A private company is entitled to do that, but it's a sick joke that female licence fee payers are forking out almost £160 a year for the privilege of being gaslit by this sexist, homophobic new religion. Sexist because women's hard-won sex-based rights are being diminished in the name of empathy and inclusion. I mean, you tell me why it's empathetic for someone who's a biological male to win an award like Woman of the Year. And it's homophobic because lesbians, for example, are now told that they're bigots and transphobes if they're not attracted to a grown man who calls himself a lesbian. It's my view that you need to be on some quite strong mind-altering drugs to come to the conclusion that a biological male can ever be a lesbian woman. Or you could just work for the BBC. Justin Webb shouldn't be punished for this so-called outburst. He should be promoted. Him spoke for millions of ordinary Brits who are sick to the back teeth of all this nonsense. Your reaction, mark@gbnews.com. If you're a trans person, I'd particularly like to hear your thoughts. But first, my top pundits: former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, former advisor to Boris Johnson and Conservative peer in the House of Lords, Kulveer Ranger, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Do you think, Kulveer Ranger, that Justin Webb should be in trouble with the BBC?
Well, as you said, Mark, I don't think so. He said something factual, which other trans women agree with, as you saw there. And so it's very hard to understand how the complaint can be upheld, or why is it that the BBC's rules around this are enabling a complaint to be upheld against Justin Webb. I think that's where, as you've been focusing on, it appears it's the rules, stupid, rather than what Justin Webb said.
Indeed. Nigel Nelson, you've got a Willy Winkle, a love sword. You surely would object to how the BBC have treated one of their main news presenters who has stated facts.
No, but the trouble is then, Mark, he hasn't stated a fact. What he's stated is a personal view. It's not actually a fact, and he's meant to be, all BBC presenters are meant to be strictly impartial. So I happen to believe that a trans woman is a woman, but I state that as my view, not as a fact, because it is a controversial area. But in this country, officially, if you are a trans woman, you are considered a woman.
OK, Annunziata, are you persuaded by Nigel's point there?
No, and in fact, I think it is deeply dangerous that young children who have been studied show brain differences from 2 or 3 months old that last until adulthood between boys and girls, men and women. We are not identical in terms of our biology, and we should not be treated as such. It took until 1993 for the USA, leading drugs producers in the entire world, to realise that it was crucial to test pharmaceutical products on both men and women, as they have different outcomes, different effects. Denying that biological truth is dangerous. Stating facts, as Justin Webb did, is absolutely important.
However, the BBC is there for all Brits, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, including the many thousands of trans people that live in the UK, that pay the licence fee, that watch Mark Dolan tonight. And all the BBC want to do is avoid taking sides, and that's how they feel that Justin Webb has gone wrong. They don't want to tell Justin Webb what to think, what not to think, but they don't want him to develop a partisan position, which is what many would argue he took.
He stated a biological fact that there are differences between the two sexes and that a female is a woman and a male is a male. Now, that has no impact on being a diverse, inclusive, welcoming society to whatever you choose to be as an adult. It does, however, matter in terms of facts and biology.
Worth reflecting, I suppose, Nigel Nelson, that trans women and trans men listening to that Radio 4 programme might have been upset and offended by what Justin Webb said, and I guess that's the concern of the Beeb.
Well, the concern of the BBC is the rules they lay down for their presenters to be totally impartial. So if this is a controversial issue, which it is, that what Justin Webb was expressing is an opinion. In this country, if you've lived in your acquired gender for 2 years and you've had a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, you are considered a woman. Your passport will say you're a woman. Your birth certificate will say you're a woman. So it is an area which is mired in controversy. I don't doubt that somebody can be a biological man. That can't be changed. But in this instance, Justin Webb got it wrong by making it a factual statement when it is his personal opinion.
OK, what's your thought on this? Mark at gbnews.com. My brilliant pundits are back at 10:30 with tomorrow's papers. It will be 10:30 sharp because producer Greg is back and he runs a tight ship. But coming up, should the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt splash the cash in next week's budget? I'll be asking tonight's Newsmaker, former Government Minister Anne Widdecombe. She's next.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
Welcome back to Headliners. And Paul, we're going to get straight into Monday's mail for some good old-fashioned, traditional male breastfeeding.
Yeah. To answer the question, what is the latest woke hell, Josh? Row as hospitals say hormone-filled milk from trans women who were born male is just as good for a baby as the real thing. It's possible for men, if they pump themselves full of estrogen, to grow larger breast tissue, and they often do. If
or you just eat lots of burgers.
Exhibit A. And once you've done that, it is actually then possible to express or lactate a liquid. Okay. If to that liquid you then add another load of pills, medication, chemicals, whatever, that lactation juice can be fed to a baby.
We don't really... This is not for the sake of the baby. The baby has no benefits from this whatsoever. The studies are very weak on it. It's a bit worrying because, you know, when hospitals started indulging in homeopathy and having, the NHS had homeopathic hospitals, that was worrying because they're supposed to be a trusted authority. And before saying something like this, there should be an awful lot of study done.
I want to shame this hospital. This is
whether it's necessary.
University Hospital Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. That's who it is. And they have written one of the stupidest sentences that I have read aloud in the 2 years that I've been privileged to do this show. It says, the term human milk is meant to be neutral and not gender biased.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Oh, my God, we're laughing at you.
I mean, and as someone says here, babies are not props. And that's the scary thing. And when we're not focusing primarily on the health of a baby.
No, but the feeling of a person doing it rather than... It's a bit of an odd way to go, isn't it? So...
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, well, look, a big reaction to my take at 10. The presenter Justin Webb from Radio 4's Today programme is in hot water with the BBC for referring to a trans woman as a male. I think it's a statement of biological fact. Well, you tend to agree. Hi, Mark, says Donald. The BBC are wrong. A trans woman is a man. A trans man is a woman. There's only two sexes, and anyone that thinks any different are delusional and need to come off whatever meds they are on. Anne says a trans woman is just a man in a dress and not a woman. I drive a Toyota... Oh, right, goodness gracious me. Shall I read it out? It's naughty. Shall I read out a naughty email, Greg? Come on, then. Mick in Stafford says, I drive a Toyota Penis and my wife drives a Volvo V60. Sometimes we swap and I get really confused. I don't think you can follow that email. Thank you for those. Told you those emails are the best bit of the show, and we don't censor, do we? I'll get to more shortly. Don't forget the papers are on their way. But this Wednesday is a red letter day in the political calendar as the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, launches his March budget. Here he is talking to the brilliant Camilla Tominey earlier today on GB News.
Likely to be the last budget before the general election. But British people are very smart. They recognise gimmicks. They don't want any tricks. What they will get on Wednesday is a prudent and responsible plan.
Well, I'm glad the Chancellor said it was likely to be the last budget before the election. If not, then they're planning to be in power for 6 years. But it is going to be the last budget. It's an important one. Should the Chancellor splash the cash in order to boost the economy, cut taxes and give his party a chance of another 5 years in power? Let's ask tonight's Newsmaker, former government minister and broadcaster Anne Widdecombe. Anne, lovely to see you as always. Can Britain afford tax cuts?
I think Britain can't afford not to have tax cuts. Tax cuts are what promote growth, and there's been consistent evidence of that over many decades. You have tax cuts, you can push growth. And the one thing that this economy desperately needs now is to grow. Now, where I agree with Jeremy Hunt is where he says, the British public aren't stupid, and that if he has a great giveaway budget, then they're not going to be taken in by it when there's only a few months to go before a general election. But the fact is that he should have shown a lot more imagination and a lot more will in previous budgets. And he hasn't done that. And when he says prudent and careful and uses language like that, I suspect what he really means is unimaginative and more of the same.
I just spoke to Tom Bauer earlier in the show, Anne. Of course, he's a political biographer and journalist. He described Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, as a failed politician. Would you agree?
Well, I certainly think he's a failed Chancellor, but then I think this entire government has failed. I mean, it's one fiasco after another, and it just hasn't done any of the things that it could have done, given the size of the majority that it has. So I think the whole government failed. I wouldn't just pick on the Chancellor.
The Chancellor has also said, Anne, that he's going to go to war on immoral Whitehall waste and axe civil service jobs. Are you convinced this will make a difference?
Oh, I'm convinced it would make a difference if it happened. But my immediate question to Jeremy would be, what the heck have you been doing over the last 4.5 years? What have you been doing? Why suddenly discover Whitehall waste just in the run-up to a general election? Silly man. I mean, does he think anybody's fooled by that?
Now, Anne, the government are still running a deficit, which means that day-to-day spending is such that more is going out than comes in. The national debt is over £2 trillion. Have politicians of all colours got to get honest with the public about the disastrous state of the nation's finances?
Well, I think everybody knew that once we took the measures that we took during COVID, that we were going to end up trillions in debt. I mean, if you pay people to stay at home, you're going to create that sort of problem. And nobody in their right senses imagines that you can just magic that away with a wand in your first year in office. Of course you can't. So inevitably, there is going to be debt for some time. That is why it's so imperative that they focus on growing the economy. For some reason, they're not focusing on that at all. It's as if they've got a money box in front of them and they're always counting up the pennies to make sure that the same number are there, without ever actually asking, what do they do outside that money box to produce income? They don't ask themselves.
Well, you mentioned the magic money box, and of course the issue is we have the deficit, we have the national debt, so the tax cuts that you crave would surely come from borrowing. That makes you sound like a socialist to me.
Well, I would be a socialist if I weren't doing it in order to produce economic growth, because it's growth which is going to get us out of the problems that we're in, and it's growth which is eventually, as it has done in the past, is going to mend the problems that the Exchequer has. All the Chancellor appears to be offering, we won't know until the budget, all he appears to be offering is very straightforwardly more of the same, not departing from where we are, despite the fact that where we are is not a good place.
And what excites you about Reform UK's proposals for the economy? I know that the party that you support revealed more details about what they would do in power just a couple of weeks ago.
Well, first of all, when we say we'll cut waste, we certainly will. And, we shan't be waiting until the next election to do it. As far as reform is concerned, you could start cutting waste right away, first week. You could start to cut waste and you could carry on doing that. Secondly, I utterly believe reform when they say that they will reduce taxes, because you have a lot of businessmen actually involved in reform who know very well that what you've got to do is produce incentives in the economy, not just, as I say, focus endlessly on the same pile of pennies.
Indeed. Now, Anne, finally, let me ask you about your reaction to the Prime Minister's unscheduled and relatively unprecedented statement about the threat of extremism on our democracy on Friday afternoon.
Well, where has he been for the last 4 years? The threat of extremism in our democracy has been growing steadily. We've had MPs murdered. We've had violent demonstrations on the streets. We've had the police not doing very much. And, of course, we've got all the problems of uncontrolled immigration when you don't know who is coming in and what they might intend to do. So you've got all of those things which do add up to a danger. I wouldn't want to create a climate of fear and panic. That's not what I'm about at all. But I do think, he's come rather late to recognising what's been going on now for some time.
And briefly, if you can, do you think that the Conservatives will call for an election in May? Do you think a spring poll is more likely now, post-budget? What's your best guess?
No, I think, as I have always thought, that if you're going to lose, and they certainly are, if you're going to lose, then you lose later rather than sooner. First of all, because you don't want to hand the opposition an immediate victory, but secondly, because you hope in a sort of political McCorberism, something might turn up.
Well, Anne Widdecombe might turn up. Surely that would transform their fortunes. Anne, always the highlight of the weekend. I'll catch you next Sunday. My thanks to former Government Minister, broadcaster and television personality Anne Widdecombe. Now, lots more to come. We've got tomorrow's papers with full pundit reactions, some really interesting headlines on the way. Plus, in an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll, I've been asking, should the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt splash the cash in next week's budget? The results are in. I shall reveal all next.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
You're now in exile. I imagine it wouldn't be safe for you to go back to Russia. Can I ask you if you feel safe personally, and what do you think can be done to remove Putin, or is he going to be there for as long as he wants?
I think that is, of course, fundamental question. It is there should be pressure inside Russia and outside. Inside Russia right now, that's impossible because Putin put all leaders in jail and some of us just abroad. Just two were already killed. Mr. Nemtsov, Boris Nemtsov, my friend, my collaborator on my party, was killed on the walls on Kremlin. Alexei Navalny was killed in jail and in the camp. And that is, the people live in fear to identify themselves as protesters, to identify themselves as against Putin's regime, etc. That's why today there is no chance for opposition to rise inside Russia. But outside, of course, this war against Ukraine, that is the fundamental issue for all foreign leaders. And in fact, just support of Ukraine and not to let Putin to destroy Ukraine, to defeat Ukraine. That is an important issue because just Ukraine, that's not just in Ukraine, war in Ukraine. Ukraine just fighting for their territorial integrity, but fighting for the whole European countries because after Ukraine, other countries could appear, other subject of aggression could be, and Putin easily could try to test Article 5 of NATO Charter. It could be one of the small countries of Baltic states.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, papers coming, but I've conducted an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's poll. We've been asking, should the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, splash the cash in next week's budget? Well, an interesting response. A solid majority, 63.1% of you say yes, he should splash the cash. 36.9% say no. Couple of emails. How about this from Wendy? Jeremy Hunt, Chancellor, he always puts me in mind of Mr. Bean. The same inane look. Well, look, what is his budget going to look like? We're going to debate that, and it's all over the papers. Let's do them. Thank you, Alistair. We start with The Guardian. Budget plan risks forcing UK into second lost decade, Jeremy Hunt warned. Jeremy Hunt has been told the budget on Wednesday risks condemning Britain to a lost decade of living standards that would leave working families almost £2,000 a year worse off. The Chancellor enters a crunch week under pressure from his party to deliver a package of pre-election tax cuts. But analysis by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation finds a widening gulf between these political demands and the reality facing millions of struggling people. Constant terror of woman held hostage in Gaza. And big tech, bigger egos. Why did Silicon Valley's dream turn sour is the other story in The Guardian. OK, where should we go next, Alistair? Let's have the Mail. Cash for care jobs visa scam. Vulnerable care residents are being looked after by unqualified migrants as rogue operators exploit Home Office loopholes. This according to a very special and rather important Daily Mail investigation. Scant checks in the desperate bid to fill huge vacancies mean untrained and overworked staff, sometimes barely able to speak English, are left caring for the elderly in the under-strain sector. OK, next up, we have the Times newspaper. On a Monday, Germans reveal secrets of UK military operations in Ukraine. And Jeremy Hunt looks for £9 billion to balance his budget. And the definition of extremism will be widened is the other story. The Eye now. Hunt fuels Tory jitters of election budget lighter on tax cuts than they would like. Metro now, warning over pill addiction, anxiety, drug deaths soar, something we discussed at length on last night's show with a rather interesting author on that subject. Telegraph next, police solve no burglaries in half of the country. And Hunt considers raising business class flight fares to fund tax cuts. And last but not least, the Daily Star. Fast food fanatic retains his hotly fought world record after scoffing 34,000 burgers. The Big Mac Daddy, salad-dodging septuagenarian Don Gorska, has retained his world record title after eating his 34,000th Big Mac in Wisconsin, USA. Barely space for a filet-o-fish. And those are your front pages. Let's get full reaction now from my top pundits this evening. Former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, ex-advisor to Boris Johnson and Conservative peer in the House of Lords, Kulveer Ranger, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. This looks like a scandal, doesn't it, Kulveer? In the Mail, an exclusive investigation. Cash for care jobs visa scam. An undercover Mail probe finds that rogue fixers are charging unqualified migrants up to £20,000 for work permits to fill vacancies. This is a national scandal.
It is a national scandal, and I think what we really need to do is, you hear about a lot of these things going on, is really expose more of these things, because there is a cost. And, you know, I speak to people, you hear from people, and they say these things are going on all the time. Now, does it take the Mail to put it on front page for maybe the Home Office and others to start really investigating and closing these scams down? Because I've got a feeling we're losing millions, if not hundreds of millions, to these kinds of incidents.
Most definitely, and of course, Annunziata, this could be your mother, your grandmother, your grandfather being taken care of by someone completely unqualified who, this story points out, may not even speak English.
It absolutely could, and I think we should all be very concerned by it. This story came up a couple of weeks ago in a slightly different form, that there was dishonesty at the heart of people applying to be carers in this country. I did a quick Google on behalf of GB News, and you can instantly find YouTube guides, how to get through the process, what forms you need and how to fill them in. There are TikTokers and YouTubers who will happily guide you through this process. None of those happen to mention that you had to pay £20,000, but if you were an employer, that would be a very, very interesting bribe to take to cut the cost of your workforce. We've got to stop cutting corners, and I'm afraid Kulveer asked, does it take a front page of the Daily Mail we saw with the Post Office scandal? Yeah. It really does take the press to get these problems sorted.
Well, definitely. Important journalism, Nigel Nelson, and actually bad for the migrants involved as well, because they're being exploited.
It's bad for everybody. And I agree with every word that's just been said. I mean, these are the kind of scams that have to be clamped down on. That it doesn't do any favours to the migrants, it does no favours to the care sector.
Yes.
You've got unqualified people there. So, no, there can be no excuse for this. And if they're charging £20,000 for work permits, this sounds to me like a police job.
But also, Nigel, I wonder if this is potentially the tip of the iceberg. Is this going on in restaurant kitchens? Is it going on in hospitals, other settings, maybe even educational settings, industry? The bottom line is that people are being exploited. Is this an argument for a more rigorous system of accepting migrants into the UK?
Well, no, it's an argument for actually stopping the scammers from being able to do something like this. And they're the ones who ought to be hunted down to actually halt this. Got nothing to do with migration, that if somebody is actually needs a job and they've got 20,000 to spare and that's the only way they can get a work permit quickly, they might go for it. It's the people behind these kind of gangs operating it that must be dealt with.
Well, Annunziata, do you think this has got anything to do with migration?
I think it has an awful lot to do with how attractive our country is to people who want to come here to benefit from our system. And what we have to do is completely crack down on both the level of legal migration and all illegal migration and get our own population jobs first.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's something about scam Britain. People are targeting Britain with other kinds of scam. Last week, I was called 3 times by a telephone scam, which we know that is going on, where people ring you and say, we're calling, here's an unbelievable offer.
Correct.
And now 3 times I've received a call in 24 hours. We are being targeted internationally by gangs, by groups. whether it's in this system, whether it's about our phones, and we need to cut down on this. This is costing us all, and it's costing us our society.
Well, indeed, Kulveer, I hate to break it to you, but you haven't won the Nigerian lottery. I'm so sorry.
Not this time.
The drinks aren't on you. Let's have a look at this story in the Eye. Let me stay with you on this, Kulveer. You know the inner workings of the Conservative Party well. Hunt fuels Tory jitters of election budget light on tax cuts. So if there is a spring poll, then that's going to need to be a very attractive budget, but it doesn't seem like there's much money to spend.
Well, we've seen the Chancellor on the airwaves today making the sort of a very light touch case for what he's going to be doing this week, quite rightly playing his cards close to his chest. But I think positioning and preparing us for a difficult budget. He doesn't have the headroom that he thought he was going to have. He's probably going to have one or two rabbits. We always find every Chancellor pulls something out of the hat unexpectedly. But the question is that going to give enough impetus to the economy? Because that's what he's really trying to jumpstart. We keep trying to hear that we need to have growth. That is the word you always hear about the economy. But the economy is only going to get growth if there's more investment, if people feel confident to spend, if interest rates start going down, and people feel they have more money in their pocket. That all sounds rather simple, but it's proving very hard to do if you can't pull those levers. The Bank of England are not cutting interest rates. They feel they can't do that. They want to keep a grip on inflation, which is the government's side to do. The Chancellor is trying to potentially cut taxes, but he's finding it hard to find the money to do it. And then we hear stories like, maybe the non-dom loophole will be closed, or maybe extra money on business class, extra taxes on business class flights to generate. This isn't going to change the economy. So I think the Chancellor has a card to play on Wednesday, and that card's going to be really big to get that economy moving.
Well, do you think that he's got some rabbit in his hat, Nigel Nelson? Because the OBR have told him there's not much cash.
There isn't much cash. I mean, and he might try and find it from somewhere else. I mean, Kulveer has just mentioned non-doms. That's to shoot Labour's fox. He might get some cash from there. But what he's actually really trying to jumpstart is sweeteners for the general election campaign. So, yes, he's looking for something, and a responsible Chancellor would say, this is not the time for tax cuts. I haven't got the money to spend. Inflation is still double the Bank of England target, and tax cuts have to be postponed until at least towards the end of the year.
Anne Widdecombe and Tom Bowers said that Jeremy Hunt has failed as a Chancellor. Do you agree?
No, I think that so far he's done fine, provided he doesn't actually now, just to win an election, go for some sort of scorched earth policy to rip away anything that Labour might have done, like getting NHS waiting list down with 2 million more operations. Those are things, if he nicks things like the non-dom tax from them, that's what will happen.
Annunciata Rees-Mogg, this in the Times newspaper, Germans reveal secrets of UK military operations in Ukraine. Highly sensitive details of British operations on the ground in Ukraine and of the transport of weapons to the front lines have leaked from an unencrypted video call involving the German military. These are our allies. With friends like that, who needs enemies?
Very good question, and I believe not the first time that NATO/military secrets versus us versus Russia have leaked from German sources in the last few months. I think it's a real concern that you can't fight alongside people who can't keep secrets secret.
Most definitely, and the EU were very slow in their response to Ukraine in the first place, weren't they?
Well, the EU
and Germany in
have a rather inflated opinion of their military might and would like to have their own fighting force. I have to say, given the state of this, I'm very glad they don't.
How about this one, Kulveer, in the Daily Telegraph, a real concern to anyone watching and listening, frankly, but it won't be surprising. The Telegraph front page has the following headline: Police solve no burglaries in half of the country. Alarming figures come despite forces promising to attend all domestic break-ins. And what's happening, Kulveer, is that statistically, burglary has been decriminalised.
It's shocking. I think all of us who, an Englishman's home is their castle. We want to feel safe in our homes. The worst and most intrusive feeling is if you come back to your home and find that something has happened, a burglar's been in there, vandalised your sacred space. But then you want to be able to rely on the police to be able to do something about it. And I think we've had a drip effect of confidence being eroded in the police. And I think when we hear stories like this, it doesn't help us. I think we want to feel confident that the police and their priorities are quite clear to help people be safe. We know they're being distracted. We know there are other things going on, the marches, the various drains on their resources in various different directions. But the priority should be people feeling safe. And I think, again, this is where the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister need to set out the priorities for the police forces.
Annunziata, is this problem of unsolved burglaries an issue of policing culture or resource?
Well, one of the things I wonder with this and what we were discussing earlier about policing the demonstrations and the rise in antisocial actions is this partly a problem of removing control from the Home Secretary to people like Sadiq Khan, who are not getting the priorities right for the people they are meant to be keeping safe, and that by pushing the decision-making further down the chain, we don't have a national policing strategy. We've got a lot of crime commissioners around the country who decide different things, and clearly, I think quite a lot of them are not getting it right, because as Corvia says, the one and only real priority for the police is to keep us all feeling safe.
Of course, Sadiq Khan would argue he's very focused on crime in London. Well, of course, you were at City Hall when Boris Johnson was mayor. He was pretty successful in cutting crime in the capital.
He was, and he was very clear with the police commissioner and commissioners that he had during that period of what the priorities were. I remember being in those meetings, hearing what the mayor wanted from the police commissioners, and the police commissioners giving us their view, but really direction was set. And I think you have to be clear with the police, because they can have many different things that they do have to deal with. They have a difficult job to do, but political clarity on what the purpose is needs to be there.
OK, brilliant. Well, look, coming up, my pundits will nominate their headline heroes and back page zeros of the day. Plus, we got the Mirror and the Express with a big story about King Charles. See you in 2.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Sadiq Khan, 6.3 million on a virtue signal, loading lines. Why is he spending the people's money in this way? And why is nobody saying anything? I want to hear from Suzanne Hall, the potential Conservative candidate, or Howard Cox, the potential Reform candidate who could potentially take this off Sadiq Khan. Why are they not speaking? This is ridiculous.
Well, it was sprung on everybody. Did you know about that?
I didn't know about it.
Nobody knows. So they're spending this money. They're spending £6.3 million, and no one knew about it. Where's the press? Where are the public consultations? No one knew. I think it's a good idea to rename the train lines, because all these train lines are so, there are like 6 of them, whatever, and they're all going all these different directions, and you tell someone to come, and you don't even know the name.
Yeah, but 6.3 million. Listen, if he wants to give me 6.3 million to come up with some virtue signalling lines, I'd like to know which advertising agency he employed to do this, how long it took him, and why he's even done it in the first place. Why has he done this?
He has done this with the virtue signalling because he's part of Team World. He's Rishi Sunak. It's this whole concept is every inclusiveness. There is no country. Nobody's English. Our own history is bad. Not my history, but whatever. The English history is bad. And it's a denial of history. It's Orwellian or something. Yeah. Not that I know about.
I think it's an absolute absurdity that Sadiq Khan should be doing that. He's got a knife crime epidemic, a crime epidemic, people stealing watches off people walking down the street. Yes. You've got the burglary as an all-time high. London, a lot of people are put off by it. And this is what he spent £6.3 million on.
This could have been a bit
to speak as to why.
But he doesn't need to speak. People need to speak out and say, well, why didn't we know about this? But the idea, can I say something to you, Nana? The idea is right. It's like, for example, take the Northern Line. You know, there are 6 Northern Lines.
6 Northern Lines.
6 different Northern Lines, maybe more now, because one goes from Mill Hill East to Mill Hill.
But this was the Overground he was...
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Well, look, many of you feel very strongly about the state of crime in this country. Alison says, in a Christian country, when police arrest Christians, I rest my case, she says. How about this? Let's have a look. You've got Wayne, who says, could you please tell your panel that not all GB News viewers live inside the M25? Well, you're absolutely right about that. Many of you just furious about that front page headline in The Times, which is that there have been police solving no burglaries in half of the country. Telegraph, I should say. Well, let's get to more front pages. Where should we go next, Alistair? Let's have the Express. And it's all about King Charles. Yes, indeed. King set to visit Australia despite cancer diagnosis. This is a great new development for our monarch. He's going to be well enough to head down under. I think that's definitely qualifies as a major royal development. Common sense calls for a 4-day week are madness, says the anti-woke minister and former GB News star, Esther McVeigh. And with the government under pressure to cut taxes, the nation is asking, can Hunt and the Prime Minister pull a rabbit out of the hat? And the Mirror, King's health boost. There you go. More on that positive story for Charles. Royals set for Australia trip. And budget cuts warning is the other headline in the Mirror. Schools in crisis, hospitals in crisis, armed forces in crisis. The price of Tory tax bribes. OK, brilliant stuff. Well, look, let's get full reaction to all of those stories from former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg. We've got Lord Coolvia Ranger and GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. And folks, let's just reflect briefly, if we can. Nigel, great news that the King will be well enough to head to Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing is that these tours are really sort of punishing. So if he's actually fit enough to do a tour like that, it shows that he really is on the mend. So,
most definitely.
Yeah, so, I mean, all that is just straightforward good news.
It is. Well done, the King, and a speedy recovery to our fine monarch. Let's now get my Pundits nominations for Headline Hero and Backpage Zero. Annunziata, who are you going to big up right now?
My hero of the week is Sir Bill Cash, MPCH. I went to a belated dinner to celebrate him being made a Companion of Honour this week. And it really brought home to me just how important our representatives in Parliament are, who fight the intellectual battles, the policy battles. It's not brash, loud, divisive, like someone like George Galloway might be. It's the real hard work that make this country the better place, the best place it can be. He's now one of 65 Companions of Honour in the whole country as a reward for his service to the betterment of this nation. How wonderful.
Well, congratulations to Sir Bill Cash, and a fastidious Brexiteer.
He is. He's been working on it for over 40 years, and I think that is a real dedication to something he really believed in and just got on quietly, no matter how unfashionable or how out there and loud the issue might be. He got on and did the hard work.
Is he going to serve another term in Parliament? Is he running at the next election, do you know?
I think he did announce last year that he will be retiring, and I think it would be a great loss to us all, but he deserves a very enjoyable retirement and has achieved a huge amount.
Definitely. Well, he's been in the studio on the show a couple of times. He's a real gentleman. Lord Coolvia Ranger, who's your headline hero?
Well, an unlikely name you may not expect, but Elon Musk. Because this weekend, I'm a techie. I've been in the tech industry for much of my career, and there's such progress going on. And obviously, we're all in some way aware of AI, artificial intelligence, and this thing, ChatGPT, that emerged at the end of last year, that enabled people to think that jobs might disappear or what might happen because AI will do everything for us. But this seminal piece of technology, generated by and developed by a company called OpenAI, and their purpose was to develop this for the good of people and not for commercialization and not for just generating vast amount of money, although that may happen.
And not for politics.
And not for politics. But they seem to be moving away from that. And that, for example, is now Microsoft has a huge investment into this firm. I think 49% of it is owned by Microsoft. But what seems to be happening is the commercialization at this very early stage of this technology. Now, let's be clear. I don't want to bore people with tech, but the data that this all works on is our data. And actually, Elon Musk was an early investor in this organization, OpenAI, that developed this ChatGPT. And their view that they would use this for people's good because it's using our data to help us. But if they start moving away from that, he's suing them for breach of contract, for not doing what they said they were going to do. Now, it's like Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He created, in other words, the internet and said the internet is free for all of us to use, which it still is. But if somebody started to charge us every time we went onto the internet, started to eat away at the edges of that freedom of using this thing, that's where this kind of conversation is. So Elon highlighting the need for something like AI to be free and open as it develops for all of us to use.
Well, indeed. I can't imagine what life would be like without Elon Musk. At the moment, he's shaping up as the saviour of the world. But, of course, that's just my opinion. Briefly, if you can, Nigel, why Dave Tully?
Well, he was the car repair shop owner in Rochdale, the runner-up there. I think it shows that democracy is alive and well if somebody gets the right message across. An independent candidate did actually very well.
OK, Nunziata, briefly, Chris Williamson and the hard left. Tell me more.
There was an interview on GB News after or during... I can't remember if it was before or after the result was announced, the by-election in Rochdale with Chris Williamson that Tom Harwood had to cut off because his views were so repugnant and he was just such a revolting man. And he started off more moderately, saying that the 1970s were the best this country had ever known it, which is so factually incorrect, it's amazing. But the idea that this hard left, highly anti-Semitic representative could be part of mainstream politics. He only stopped being a Labour MP in 2019.
And the same goes for George Galloway, which is Colville's nomination, and Robert Jenrick suffers Nigel Nelson's ire. Thanks to my amazing team, my fabulous pundits, you for your company. I'll see you Friday at 8. Headliners is next.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. It's quite a cold night tonight, some frost and dense fog patches once more. And then all eyes to the west as the next area of low pressure moves in, but it's going to take its time. Western areas seeing outbreaks of rain through Monday, northern and eastern areas holding on to dry weather until later. This evening, though, skies are clearing and temperatures are starting to fall away overnight. We'll see quite a widespread frost developing. Where winds are light, we'll see some mist and fog patches forming. Freezing fog patches as temperatures fall below freezing in the countryside. So there could be some tricky travelling conditions first thing, particularly across central southern parts of the UK. Further west, however, the winds start to increase, outbreaks of rain start to push in, and then this slowly moves north and eastwards through the day on Monday. Some heavier bursts in there possible, though parts of Scotland, northern and eastern parts of England will stay dry for much of the day. Plenty of sunny spells here, and the winds coming in from the south, temperatures lifting a little higher than the weekend, highs around 12 Celsius in the best of any brighter weather in the south. Then into Tuesday, weather systems start to clear away. We're left with a legacy of showers across some western areas, but there'll be plenty of sunny spells through the day. One or two of the showers could be on the heavy side. The next few days, it largely remains dry. There'll be some bright or sunny spells at times, temperatures above average.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.